Okay, we're going to be looking today at another one of the anthology poems. This time it is The Forsaken Wife by Elizabeth Thomas. And you can see as well the pseudonym that she wrote under, Corinna. And it's interesting to think perhaps for a moment as to why she might have not wanted to use her real name when writing. And as we read the poem today, we'll sort of discover that she's dealing with some issues which, at the time this was written in around 1722, would have been deemed quite controversial, and certainly not topics that one would necessarily want to sort of discuss openly, or views perhaps that would have been considered challenging in some way at the time. Okay, so I've just added in a couple of details here. So the fact that it was written in around 1722, and you'll notice some of the language might seem perhaps a little bit unfamiliar or strange, owing to the fact that it is a few hundred years old. And then also the fact that Corinna was a pen name used by Elizabeth Thomas, perhaps because her poetry expressed some slightly challenging or controversial views, and we'll discover what those are. So let's think about the title, so The Forsaken Wife. Now, the first thing perhaps to note is that actually Elizabeth Thomas herself, as far as we know, was relatively happily married. And so here she's writing from the perspective of a persona, or sort of another figure, and she's imagining what this person is going through, and the title gives us quite a big clue as to who that person is. It's this idea of a forsaken wife, so a married woman who has been abandoned by her husband, and we'll discover as we read the poem a little bit more about why that is. But certainly it's worth noting that this word forsaken, it has sort of quite sort of powerful connotations, I think, the sense of being abandoned, being left alone, and perhaps some of the sense of sort of hopelessness that comes with that. Okay, so I'm just going to read the poem now, and then talk briefly about some of the sort of the meaning behind what Elizabeth Thomas writes. So, The Forsaken Wife. Methinks 'tis strange you can't afford one pitying look, one parting word. Humanity claims this as its due, but what's humanity to you? Cruel man, I am not blind, your infidelity I find. Your want of love my ruin shows, my broken heart, your broken vows. Yet maugre all your rigid hate, I will be true in spite of fate. And one preeminence I'll claim, to be forever still the same. Show me a man that dare be true, that dares to suffer what I do, that can forever sigh unheard, and ever love without regard. I will then own your prior claim to love, to honour, and to fame. But till that time, my dear, adieu. I yet superior am to you. So immediately we begin with this slightly sort of old-fashioned word, methinks. But it means basically exactly what you would imagine, I think. So we've got this person, the forsaken wife, I think we can safely assume, speaking, and she is addressing somebody, this you in the first line. And that, I think we can, again, sort of safely say, is the husband who has abandoned her, who has left her forsaken. And so she says, methinks 'tis strange you can't afford one pitying look, one parting word. So here we get the sense that she's sort of accusing her husband of not just of leaving, but leaving without even one sort of look backwards, one look of pity or of regret or of sorrow, or even one parting word. So, nowadays you might call this ghosting somebody, the sense of just completely disappearing without a trace from their life. And that seems to be what has happened here. And Elizabeth Thomas goes on, lines 3 and 4, to ask this question. She says, humanity claims this, so I suppose the sort of the dignity of at least a sense of regret, of sadness, a parting word. Humanity would claim that as its due, as something that is owed to it. So in other words, it's just humane, it's basic sort of human kindness to do this. But then she asks this quite sort of stinging rhetorical question, but what's humanity to you? In other words, implying perhaps that her husband who abandoned her, who left her, doesn't have any humanity. I think the tone of that rhetorical question is quite sort of biting and angry. And as we move into stanza 2, that anger doesn't really let up. We begin with this, again, powerful accusation, cruel man. I am not blind, your infidelity I find. So in other words, she tells him, she makes him aware that she knows that he has been unfaithful to her. And again, we can see that the tone of it is very sort of angry, that cruel man, but then also quite sort of matter of fact. She's presenting him with the facts. Your want of love my ruin shows, my broken heart, your broken vows. So your want of love, this is perhaps slightly tricky from a language perspective, but I suppose the best way to explain it would be to say your lack of love. So she wants his love, but he is not giving that to her. So your lack of love, my ruin shows, my broken heart, your broken vows. And so again, like in the first line, we have this methinks and you, this contrast between the two figures in this story. Here we have a similar thing, my broken heart, your broken vows. We think about what the vows are, the promises that he made to her, and the vows, the wedding vows, I suppose, as well, that he would love her. And we might think of the sort of the famous line, until death do us part. So this idea that when he married her, he promised to sort of love her through thick and thin, good times and bad times, and he's now broken those vows. And then as we move through the second stanza, we have this slightly unusual word, morgue, or morgue, I suppose would be the French or more French pronunciation, and it means, broadly speaking, despite. So, yet despite all your rigid hate, I will be true in spite of fate, and one preeminence I'll claim, to be forever still the same. So despite her husband's rigid hate, she calls it, she says that she will remain true. So she's not going to do what he did. She's going to remain loyal to him, and she's not going to sort of follow in his footsteps, as it were, and sort of betray him as she feels herself to have been betrayed. And then that allows her, in the last two lines of this second stanza, to claim something, to claim a preeminence, meaning a sort of a superiority. So she's able to claim a superiority, and that is to be forever still the same. So while he has changed and he has broken the promises he made, she says that she will be forever still the same. So in that contrast that we've had throughout this poem between her and him, she claims that superiority, that ability to remain true, to remain loyal and faithful. And as we get into the third stanza, Thomas has this, the speaker, this forsaken wife, sort of continue her thoughts and say, when she says, show me a man that dare be true, that dares to suffer what I do. She's suggesting perhaps that this man doesn't exist, that actually this is something, this experience at the time, especially in 1722, is unique to women, that only women can sort of go through something quite like this. And we might think as well about the sort of the status of women within society at the time, in the sense that actually marriage was was in many ways the sort of the only security that a woman might find in life. As a daughter, she would belong essentially to her father, and then upon marriage would sort of be passed to her husband. And so actually this isn't something that a man at the time could even experience, and certainly Thomas doesn't see somebody who would go through this in the way that this forsaken wife is going through it. She suggests that there probably isn't a man who would dare be true, who would dare to suffer what this forsaken wife is going through. And she continues that thought in the third and fourth lines of this final stanza, that can forever sigh unheard and ever love without regard. So this idea of the sigh, the sort of the sadness within her, going unheard, and yet this is just her existence. She does this and she feels this pain, but she doesn't necessarily have an outlet for it, or a way of perhaps sort of talking about it, and a man who could ever love without regard. So this idea that she doesn't believe that there is a man out there who would be willing to go through this in the way that she's going through it, would be willing to sort of remain loyal and true in love, even when that wasn't being reciprocated. And so then she goes on to say, I will then own your prior claim to love, to honour, and to fame. So she's taking the vows that he made, the promises that he made when he married her, to love, to honour, and to fame, and she's claiming them. So in other words, she's sort of taking them. She's saying, look, these aren't, you didn't do these things. You weren't true. You didn't love me, honour me, fame me, and so she's claiming those for herself, because she is continuing to do that. This forsaken wife, despite being forsaken, she isn't sort of behaving in the same way. And then in these final two lines, she says, "But till that time, my dear, adieu. I yet superior am to you." And so here, this sort of claim that she made earlier, she's sort of using that to signal and to say that actually she's better than him, because of the fact that she has remained loyal and true and honest in a way that he has failed to do. And so we might see in that final part of the poem a small sort of victory, if you like, for the forsaken wife, even though she's incredibly hurt and angry and sad about what has happened. She's able to sort of take some comfort in the fact that she hasn't broken her vows, and the fact that she has been honest, and the fact that her love has been true. Okay, so just going to look a little bit more closely now at some of the language choices, and I think perhaps one of the first things to note is the various times throughout the poem that Elizabeth Thomas has this speaker, the forsaken wife, contrast herself with her husband, and indeed sometimes contrast sort of women and men more generally, perhaps, in the situations they're in more generally. So it begins right in the first line. So we have said this slightly sort of strange word, methinks, but I think 'tis strange you can't afford one pitying look, one parting word. So the contrast is sort of set up immediately there, and it continues throughout the poem, but particularly perhaps in the second stanza in this line, where she says, "My broken heart, your broken vows," and they're sort of they're kind of linked together but contrasted at the same time. Her broken heart is as a result of his broken vows. So there's this connection between them, but at the same time they've acted in completely different ways, and so she's again highlighting that fact. Then in the third stanza, we have a similar idea right at the start when she says, I'm just going to sort of make this highlighter a bit smaller. She says, "Show me a man that dare be true, that dares to suffer what I do." So here she's contrasting this sort of a man, any man really. She's saying nobody really would put up with what I do. And then again in the final line we get the contrast, but perhaps it's changed here slightly, because she's not just sort of drawing the contrast, but she's saying that the I figure, is superior. I yet superior am to you. So running throughout this whole poem, we have a contrast, I suppose, in the behavior between the forsaken wife and the husband who was unfaithful to her and who left her. And we've also got a contrast in their attitudes, I suppose, to the promises that they made. But also, ultimately, Elizabeth Thomas seems to be saying that there's a contrast in the kind of the moral value, I suppose, of each of them, and that superiority that she claims at the end is as a result of the way that she has been honest and true and faithful. Okay, so I've just put up here the fact that there are various sort of parts of the poem that set up this contrast between the forsaken wife and her unfaithful husband. I think another thing running through the poem is the sense of anger that is felt by the forsaken wife. So if we look in the first stanza, the rhetorical question, what's humanity to you? So this sense that the husband in being unfaithful has sort of been almost inhumane in his cruelty, and not just for being unfaithful, but also for leaving without one pitying look, one parting word. And we can hear the sort of plosive alliteration here, perhaps sort of helping to convey the anger felt by the forsaken wife. So he hasn't given her one pitying look or one parting word, and that leads her to ask him, "What's humanity to you?" And again, the anger continues. Cruel man. We've got this the caesura of the exclamation mark here. Actually, I'll just put that word in, which I think really conveys the sort of the anger. Cruel man, it sort of stands alone as just this very powerful accusation. I'm not blind, your infidelity, I find. I think if we also want to pick up perhaps on just a little bit further down what she calls his rigid hate. So there's a sense in which he's sort of been really sort of inflexible, I suppose, perhaps won't even communicate with her, won't speak with her. And again, I think her use of Thomas's use of these words, rigid hate, conveys the forsaken wife's anger at the way she's been treated. And I think really the other thing to pick up on here is the sadness that she feels. So it's kind of, I think, running through the poem, we've got both of these emotions, the sort of anger on the one hand, but also a real sadness on the other. And we might look at perhaps this word strange up at the top. She says it's strange that he can't afford her, a look as he leaves or a word as he leaves. But is there perhaps more to explore here? What's strange about it? Is it that the feelings are so sort of powerful that she almost can't understand them? Is it strange because she can't really explain it, and it seems to her so sort of almost impossible that it could have happened, that she can't quite believe it. And then she talks in the second stanza of her ruin, and again, this is a very sort of powerful word. We might think about something that's been completely destroyed, and that's how she's left feeling by what has happened. And she talks about her ruin. And again, we might think about what the implications would have been for a woman at the time who was abandoned or forsaken by her husband. What would her sort of her prospects be in terms of where would she live? What would her financial outlook be? These kinds of things. So ruin has, I think, some wider meaning there as well. And then she talks about this phrase, her broken heart, and I suppose it's become almost a bit of a cliche, or rather, not a cliche, but perhaps it's become such a common phrase to be broken-hearted that if you take a step back from it, again, it fits, doesn't it, with the idea of ruin. If something's ruined or broken, it's been completely destroyed, and again, I think that's quite a powerful insight into how this wife has been left feeling. Again, I think a sense of her sadness is conveyed here in the third stanza. She talks about a sense of what she suffers, and it's not just suffering to be born, but she has to dare to suffer it, sort of implying that it's a challenge, something really difficult for her to do, that can forever sigh unheard again. We get a sense of the immense sadness that this situation has caused her. So I think that's another key idea running through the poem. So we've got the sort of the contrast set up between the forsaken wife and the unfaithful husband. We've got the sense of anger she feels towards him for what he has done, but we've also got the immense sadness that she feels as a result of what has happened and the way that she has been treated. Okay, so I've just put those up there. So the idea that these are some of the kind of the big ideas running through the poem, the speaker's sadness and her anger. And I actually just wanted to add one more to the idea of her anger, in particular this phrase just after she's called him a cruel man. She says, "I am not blind," and in the sense that she knows what's been going on. She knows that he's been untrue to her, and I think again the tone of that line conveys some of that feeling of anger and disdain, I suppose, that she feels towards him. She's almost sort of saying, you're not as clever as you think you are. Okay, and now I just want to take a look at another, I think, really important idea here, which is that despite her sadness, despite her powerlessness in some respects, being forsaken this way, and despite her anger, she also claims a kind of victory, a moral victory, if you like, over her husband. She says, for example, yet more got all your rigid hate, so despite your rigid hate, I will be true in spite of fate. So here there's a sense that where he has been false or dishonest, she will be true. So she's sort of claiming a sort of a moral victory, a sense of superiority. Indeed, she actually goes on to say that. She says, one preeminence I'll claim. So preeminence is a sort of a way in which one is better, a way in which something is better than something else, a preeminence. So one superiority I'll claim. And even that word claim, it's like she's sort of taking something back. She's lost something, but here she's claiming at least a moral victory amidst all the other emotions. And what is that victory? It is to be forever still the same. So this sense of constancy, the sense that she will not behave in the way that he has behaved. And here again in the final stanza, we see more of this language relating to the idea of victory. She says, I will then own your prior claim, so the claim that he once made, that he would be true to her. She says she's going to own it. She's going to take it. It's hers now. And in fact, in that final line, she makes it very, very clear. She says, I yet superior am to you. And so, despite all of this, despite the way that she's been treated, despite the anger that it has caused, and the sadness that it has caused, there is also this sense of her moral superiority over the man who has left her and who has abandoned her, forsaken her. So that kind of takes me to the last part of the of this video, which is about writing about the poem. So I'd say for a poem like this, you're quite likely to get a question asking you to explore how the poet conveys her thoughts and feelings. And I think actually sort of structuring an essay around some of these big ideas and showing that you understand what those thoughts and feelings are, and then exploring the language choices that Thomas makes in a bit more detail would be quite a good way of approaching that. Anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments.